So, who was the leader of a prehistoric tribe? It's one of those questions that feels simple. You picture a guy, probably a big guy. He's got a beard, a fur wrap, and a heavy club. He points, people listen. He grunts, people jump. He's the strongest, the toughest, the one who wins all the fights. That's the leader. It's a powerful image. It's also probably wrong. Or at least it's only a tiny, tiny piece of a much bigger, more interesting story. The truth is, there was no single type of leader. Prehistory wasn't a single moment. It was a staggering stretch of time, millions of years long. It covers dozens of different human-like species, living in every environment imaginable, from icy plains to dense jungles. The kind of leader a small group of early hominins needed to find fruit in Africa was completely different from the leader a band of Neanderthals needed to survive a European winter. And that was different again from the leader a community of early Homo sapiens needed to paint a cave or trade with a neighboring group. To find an honest answer, we have to throw out the simple cartoon of the caveman chief. We have to look at the clues. We have anal old bones, stone tools, ancient campsites. And we have to look at our closest living relatives, the great apes, and at modern hunter-gatherer societies. We have to think like detectives, piecing together a story without any written words to guide us. The story that emerges isn't about one leader. It's about how leadership itself evolved. Let's go way back, to the beginning of our family tree with ancestors like Australopithecus. These were small, ape-like beings. They walked on two legs, but their brains weren't much bigger than a chimpanzee's. What would leadership look like for them? For a group like this, life was about basic survival. Find food. Avoid becoming food. Find a safe place to sleep. Leadership, if you can even call it that, would have been raw and immediate. It probably looked a lot like what we see in chimpanzee troops today. There's often an alpha male, but he's not always the biggest or the strongest. He's often the most clever, the best at building alliances. He grooms other chimps, shares food with his supporters, and works with them to keep his position. He can be overthrown not by a single stronger rival, but by two or three others who team up against him. So, for our earliest ancestors, the leader might have been a dominant male who was good at social politics. But it was likely a tense and unstable position, and his leadership was probably limited. He might get first choice of food or mates, but he wasn't making grand plans for the group's future. Leadership could have also been situational. The one who leads is the one who knows something right now. An older female might know the location of a hidden waterhole during a drought. For that journey, she's the one everyone follows. Her knowledge is more valuable than anyone's strength. Another individual might be exceptionally good at spotting predators. When they give an alarm call, everyone runs, no questions asked. In that moment, they are the leader. Leadership wasn't a permanent title. It was a temporary role you filled based on what the group needed. It was fluid. Now let's move forward in time, maybe a million years or so. We meet Homo erectus. This is a game changer. Their brains were bigger. They were taller, built more like us. They made more sophisticated tools, teardrop-shaped hand axes that show a real sense of planning and design. And, critically, they were likely the first to control fire and hunt large animals in a coordinated way. This changes everything for leadership. Hunting a giant deer or a wild horse isn't something one person can do alone. It requires a team, it requires a plan, it requires communication and trust. You need someone to see the big picture, someone to decide, we'll wait here behind these rocks. You two circle around to the left and drive it towards us. When it gets close, we'll attack. The person who makes that plan is the leader of the hunt. Are they the strongest? Sure, maybe, but it's more important that they are experienced. They have to understand the animal's behavior. They have to know the terrain. They have to be able to communicate the plan, even with simple gestures and sounds. Their authority comes from their proven success. If their plans work and the group eats, people will follow them next time. If their plans fail, they'll lose that influence. This is leadership based on skill and competence, not just brute force. And what about fire? Imagine being the first group to control fire. It provides warmth on a cold night. It keeps predators away. It cooks food, making it easier to digest and unlocking more calories. The person who knew how to start a fire, how to keep it going, and how to transport it would have been incredibly important. They held the key to the group's safety and comfort. This person, man or woman, old or young, would have held a form of power. They weren't a chief giving orders, but they were a central figure the group depended on. Their leadership came from providing a vital resource. This is a new kind of leader emerging. Not just the dominant alpha, but the skilled specialist, the wise provider. The group's success now depends not on one person's strength, but on the combined knowledge and skills of many. Leadership is probably still fluid, but it's becoming more complex. Let's jump ahead again to the time of the Neanderthals and the first modern humans, Homo sapiens. We're now in a world of even bigger brains and more complex societies. The evidence we find from this period is profoundly human. We find Neanderthal burial sites. In a cave in Iraq called Shenadar, they found the skeleton of a man who was old for his time, maybe around 40. He had been seriously injured years before he died. He was partially blind, had a withered arm, and walked with a painful limp. He couldn't have hunted. He couldn't have been a strong fighter. In a brutal survival of the fittest world, he would have been left behind. But he wasn't. His group cared for him for years. They fed him, protected him. This tells us something vital. Their society wasn't just about strength, it was about compassion. It was about the group bond. So who was a leader in a group like that? Maybe it wasn't a single person. Maybe leadership was more communal, or maybe the leader was someone who was good at fostering this kind of cooperation. The person who was the best at resolving arguments, the one who reminded everyone of their duty to each other. A leader whose strength was empathy. This person's job wasn't to lead the charge, but to hold the group together. In this world, elders become incredibly important. An old woman who can no longer gather food is not a burden. She is a library. She has lived through 50 winters. She remembers the great drought and where the secret spring was. She knows which mushrooms will kill you and which ones will heal a fever. She knows the stories of the ancestors. Her knowledge is the group's hard drive, its survival guide. When a crisis hits, everyone turns to her. Her wisdom is her power. She might be the most influential person in the group without ever lifting a spear. This is leadership based on accumulated knowledge and experience. Then we get to the great creative explosion of the Upper Paleolithic about 40,000 years ago. This is the time of our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens, spreading across the globe. And they start doing something new. They start making art, stunning, sophisticated art. They crawl deep into the darkest parts of caves, and by the flickering light of animal fat lamps, they paint magnificent images of horses, bison, and mammoths on the walls. They carve intricate figures from bone and ivory. What does this have to do with leadership? Well, everything. This art wasn't just for decoration. It was likely tied to ritual, to belief, to a spiritual world. The caves at Lascaux or Chauvet weren't art galleries. They were cathedrals. The people who went deep into the earth to paint these animals, who perhaps led the songs and dances that went with them, were not just artists. They were shamans, spiritual guides. This is a brand new kind of leader. This leader's power doesn't come from their physical strength or their hunting skill. It comes from their connection to the unseen world. They can interpret dreams. They can call on the spirits of the animals to ensure a successful hunt. They can heal the sick. Their authority is mystical. They hold the group's worldview together. They answer the big questions. Where do we come from? Where do the spirits go when we die? This shaman might not have been a full-time leader. During the day, they might be a regular hunter or toolmaker, but when the time for ritual came, they stepped into a different role. Their influence could have been immense. In a world full of danger and uncertainty, a person who could offer meaning and a sense of control would have been a powerful leader indeed. Alongside the shaman, another type of leader was probably emerging the diplomat. During this period, we see evidence of long-distance trade. Seashells from the coast are found hundreds of miles inland. High-quality flint from one region is found in another. This didn't happen by accident. It means different groups were meeting and interacting. This requires social skill. You need someone who can approach a group of strangers without getting a spear thrown at them. Someone who is good at negotiating. Someone who can build relationships of trust and reciprocity. This person, the trader or the diplomat, becomes the group's link to the wider world. They bring in new materials, new ideas, and new allies. Their leadership is based on charisma and social intelligence. They are the networkers of the prehistoric world. So now our picture of a leader is incredibly varied. It could be the strong hunter, yes, but it could also be the wise elder, the empathetic caregiver, the skilled toolmaker, the mystical shaman, or the charismatic diplomat. And in many groups, these roles were likely spread among different people. There might not have been a single chief. Instead, there was a council of elders, or a group of respected individuals who led in their own specific areas. The leadership was distributed. The group was led not by a person, but by a system of respect based on skill, wisdom, and social contribution. For hundreds of thousands of years, this fluid egalitarian model was probably the norm for humanity. Most hunter-gatherer societies that survived into modern times operated in a similar way. They have a deep-seated suspicion of anyone who tries to accumulate too much power. They value humility and generosity above all else. A good leader isn't someone who boasts, it's someone who provides for others and doesn't ask for anything in return. The anthropologists call this fierce egalitarianism. It was likely the default political system for our species for most of its existence. But then, something changed. About 10,000 years ago, we see the beginning of the agricultural revolution. Humans started to settle down, they started planting crops and raising animals. This was without a doubt one of the most significant shifts in our history. And it completely transformed the nature of leadership. A hunter-gatherer group is mobile, they own only what they can carry. Food is usually shared immediately because it can't be stored for long. There is little concept of personal wealth. A farming community is the opposite. They are tied to their land. They have houses, fields, and granaries. For the first time, people could create a surplus. You could grow more food than you needed to eat right away. Surplus creates wealth. And wealth creates inequality. And inequality creates a new kind of leader. In these early farming villages, a new model of leadership emerged, which anthropologists sometimes call the big man. A big man is not a formal chief. He has no official power. He can't order anyone to do anything. He leads through influence, and he builds that influence through hard work and extreme generosity. Here's how it works. A man who is particularly ambitious and hardworking might clear a larger field. He and his family work tirelessly and produce a huge harvest, far more than they need. What does he do with the surplus? He gives it away. He throws a massive feast for the whole village. He gives generous gifts to his neighbors. By doing this, he places everyone in his debt. They feel a social obligation to him. The next time he wants to build a new hut or clear another field, he can call on them for help, and they will feel compelled to provide it. If he continues to be successful and generous, his prestige grows. People start coming to him to mediate disputes. Or they value his opinion. He becomes a leader, not through force, but through social currency. He has turned his wealth into influence. This is a crucial step. Leadership is no longer just situational. It's becoming a more stable, long-term position tied to the control and redistribution of resources. But it's still a fragile system. The big man has to keep working, keep producing, and keep giving things away. If he has a bad harvest or becomes selfish, his influence vanishes. But you can see where this is going. What happens when a very successful big man dies? His son might inherit his land and his storehouses. He might try to inherit his father's prestige. People might feel a lingering obligation to the family. As over generations, this influence can become more entrenched. The leadership role that was once earned through personal effort starts to become inherited. This is the birth of the chief. The chief is different from the big man. A chief holds a formal office. Their authority is recognized and passed down through their bloodline. They don't just have influence, they have power. They can command labor, they can demand a portion of everyone's harvest as tribute. They are the manager of the village's economy. The surplus that once flowed through the big man in feasts now flows to the chief in a central storehouse. With this concentration of resources and power, society changes. We start to see the construction of large public works, defensive walls, irrigation systems, monuments. We start to see the first signs of social stratification: a chiefly class, a priestly class, and commoners. We start to see the beginnings of organized warfare, as chiefs compete for land, resources, and prestige. The prehistoric leader who was once the best hunter, or the wisest elder, or the most generous provider, has now evolved into something much more familiar to us, a ruler. The fluid, egalitarian world of the hunter-gatherer band is giving way to the hierarchical world of the chiefdom. This is the political structure that would eventually lead to kingdoms, to states, and to the world we know today. So, when we ask who the leader of a prehistoric tribe was, the answer is a reflection of ourselves. It is a story of evolution. In the deepest past, the leader was perhaps the one who was best at navigating the complex social world of a small group, much like a chimpanzee alpha. As our ancestors became more sophisticated, the leader was the one with the most skill, the master hunter, the firekeeper, the expert toolmaker. Their authority was earned through competence. Then, as we became fully human, leadership became even more diverse. It was the wise elder with a lifetime of knowledge. It was the empathetic caregiver who held the group's social fabric together. It was the shaman who connected the physical world to the spiritual. It was the diplomat who built bridges to other groups. Leadership was often shared, temporary, and grounded in the respect of the community. And finally, with the invention of farming, a new kind of leader was born from surplus and settlement. The generous big man who turned wealth into influence, and who eventually became the hereditary chief who wielded true power. The guy with the big club, he was probably there at some point. Intimidation and physical dominance have always been one path to power. but it was never the only path, and for most of our long prehistoric journey, it was likely not the most important one. The leaders who truly ensured our survival and success were the cooperators, the innovators, the keepers of knowledge, and the builders of community. They were men and women, they were young and old. They led not with a club, but with a skill, an idea, a story, or a gift. The story of prehistoric leadership isn't about a single static figure. It's the story of how we learned to live together, how we organized ourselves to solve problems, and how the very idea of power changed as our world changed. It's a reminder that leadership has never been just one thing, and the qualities that made a good leader in the past wisdom, skill, empathy, generosity, and the ability to bring people together for a common goal are still the ones that matter most.